Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. The ancient bones of the coast, they stand there still, as they have for longer than your mind can truly hold. White walls rising out of the blue, their faces turned toward the horizon, as though they had been keeping watch for all of human history. But their story began long before there were people to watch them. Long before there was an England at all, when this place was not land, but a warm, shallow sea, an ocean buried in stone millions upon millions of years ago. In the late Cretaceous period, this corner of the world lay beneath water so warm it could have been a cradle for life. The seafloor here was busy, not with great creatures, but with the smallest ones, microscopic plankton called coccolithophores, drifting gently, turning sunlight into life. When they died, their tiny calcium-rich shells drifted down like a slow, constant snow. Layer upon layer, millimeter by millimeter, this soft rain of shells settled into a blanket over the ocean bed. Over millions of years, that blanket thickened, pressed under its own weight until it became chalk, a stone so soft you can mark it with a fingernail, and yet so enduring that it would one day rise into sheer cliffs hundreds of feet high. The long silence before the rise time passed in measures beyond human scale. The seabed slept. The chalk layers deepened. Then the earth shifted. Tectonic plates, moving at the pace of fingernails growing, slowly crumpled the seabed upward. What had once been hidden underwater began to rise toward air in that immense silence. Long before any human foot pressed this ground, the cliffs began to take shape. Wind began to touch them. Rain began to run down their faces. And the sea, their old companion, now stood below them instead of above, licking at their base with every tide. The first human eyes by the time people arrived here. The cliffs were already ancient. Imagine the first wanderers coming from inland, cresting a hill to see that sudden whiteness stretching along the horizon in a world without cities, without concrete or marble. These chalk walls must have seemed otherworldly, a boundary between the known and the vast unknown sea. They became a marker. If you were a sailor, think with the first thing you saw of home and the last thing you saw when leaving. Even now, planes approaching England from the south can sometimes catch the same sight, that pale, vertical edge meeting the restless blue. The bones beneath the grass stand on the grassy headlands above the cliffs, and it's easy to forget what lies just under your feet, beneath the soil and wildflowers. The ground is not dark earth, but bright, powdery stone, a compressed memory of ancient seas. Sometimes you'll find it in the palm of your hand, a small fossil, spiral shell, or tiny imprint, as crisp as the day it sank into the silt millions of years ago. They are reminders that these cliffs are not just land. They are the skeleton of an ocean, the breath of the wind, the pulse of the sea. The chalk cliffs do not stand in stillness. They live in the slow breathing of weather and tide. The wind brushes them in summer, carries salt spray against them in winter. The waves gnaw at their base in the rhythm of the moon, each high tide taking away what the low tide cannot reach. To stand here is to feel how much the coast is a conversation, land and sea speaking to each other in the language of erosion and resistance. The gift and the fragility chalk is a paradox. It is strong enough to stand as towering walls for millennia, yet soft enough to crumble in your hand. This is why the cliffs are so striking. They are the color of fragility, the shape of endurance. They've survived ice ages, weathered storms, and watched empires rise and fall. But they are not unchangeable. They are not immortal. They are the earth's ancient bones, and even bones, given enough time, would turn to dust. A story written in layers. If you could slice into the cliff face like a cake, you'd see its story written in bands. Some layers are thick and pure white ages, when the sea was calm and life abundant. Others are peppered with flint, born from silicaturate sponges and dissolved minerals that hardened into black stone within the chalk. Geologists read these stripes like historians read manuscripts, tracing the changes in climate and life over tens of millions of years. Every crack, every fossil, every seam of flint is a sentence in a very slow, very patient story, the guardians of the horizon for centuries. These cliffs have been more than geology. They've been symbols of home, of boundary, of protection. In wartime, they were the watchtowers of the coast, standing over beaches where history turned. In peace, they became postcards, poems, and songs. People have projected meaning onto them, but the cliffs themselves have simply kept their silent vigil, unchanged in purpose, though never unchanged in form. The quiet clock of the cliffs every year, a little more of them is gone. Sometimes it's a boulder the size of a car that tumbles into the sea. Sometimes it's a section the length of a football field collapsing in a single afternoon. Most of the time, it's invisible grains carried away in the foam, soft edges rounded by the wind. If you could watch the cliffs in time-lapse over centuries, you'd see them breathing inward, step by slow step, as though the sea were pulling them closer with every tide, a place between two infinities standing at their edge. You can feel how small you are. Above you, the sky stretches into its own horizon. Below you, the sea folds and unfolds forever. And here, between them, is the cliff, a wall of time. It's a fragment of Earth's memory slowly being read back into the waves. It is humbling to know that one day, the spot where you stand will be gone. Not next year, not in your lifetime, but eventually and inevitably. The invitation to witness the cliffs do not ask you to save them. They do not ask you to turn away. They simply exist, offering you a view of the horizon, and of time itself. They invite you to remember that permanence is an illusion, and that beauty can be most powerful when it is fleeting. So you stand, letting the wind carry the salt to your skin, watching the gulls arc against the white, knowing that what you see now is not what someone saw a century ago, and not what someone will see a century from now. From a distance, the chalk coastline appears as a single, unbroken brushstroke drawn across the southern edge of England. It catches the sunlight in a way that almost feels deliberate, as though the earth itself meant to mark this place with a signature. If you've ever seen it from the deck of a ship or through the window of a low-flying plane, you know how it stands apart from the rest of the shore. It is not the muted sand browns of a beach, nor the dark basalt of volcanic cliffs. It is pure, pale chalk, like a line of bones set between the green of the land and the restless blue of the sea. The first glimpse from the sea for sailors in centuries past. These cliffs were more than scenery. They were confirmation to weeks or months crossing oceans, straining eyes toward the horizon. The first glint of white meant home. In those moments, the captain might ease his shoulders. Crew members might murmur to one another. Cliffs did not speak, but they carried the weight of a promise. Land is near, rest is near. To approach them was to feel the slow dissolve of uncertainty. Even for those arriving from foreign shores, seeing them was an event, etched into memory like the first sight of a loved one after a long absence. The coastline that holds 1,000 views from the landward side. The cliffs look different. You might begin in a village cobbled streets, a church spire cutting into the sky, and walk outward until houses give way to open grassland. And then, quite suddenly, you are at the edge. The drop is sharp. Below, the water churns in endless motion, and you can hear the hollow boom of waves echoing into caves at the base of the cliffs. From here, you see their texture, the vertical striations where rainwater has carved faint channels into the chalk, the dark ovals of flint nodules embedded like punctuation marks in a pale manuscript. Every angle offers something different. From the east, the cliffs seem to glow at dawn. From the west, they burn briefly in the low amber of sunset. And, in overcast weather, they soften to a kind of luminous gray, like the inside of a seashell. The constant conversation with the sea of the shoreline is not a static border. It is a moving conversation between water and land. With each tide, the sea brushes against the base of the cliffs. Sometimes it seems gentle, merely foaming around boulders that have fallen. Other times, in storms, it throws itself at them with force, ripping away tons of chalk in a single night. The waves never stop. They are patient. They know they have time. Walking along the top of the coastal paths here carry the scent of salt, the feel of wind that comes uninterrupted from miles of open water. Grass grows thick and wiry, bent into the direction of the prevailing wind over years of leaning. As you walk, you may pass wooden signs warning of erosion, the polite reminder that what lies under your feet is not eternal. In places, you can see where the path once continued, now ending abruptly at a raw edge where earth and chalk have sheared away. The cracks that speak quiet warnings. Those who study the cliffs know the signs. A hairline fracture running through the grass, a subtle dip in the ground, a hollow sound when you tap the soil with your boot. To the casual walker, these are nothing. To the geologist or coastal ranger, they are sentences in a language of collapse, an early chapter in the fall of a section of cliff. It might happen tomorrow. It might happen years from now, but the process has already begun. Villages and towns watching the edge along certain stretches of coast. Houses sit just a few dozen meters from the brink. From their windows, the view is spectacular. Seabirds wheeling in the updrafts, ships like small toys on the horizon. But in storms, the sound of waves carries differently. It is not just background noise. It is a reminder of distance measured in time, not meters. One generation may feel safe. The next may need to move inland. It is a quiet truth of living near the cliffs. The land beneath you is always in the smallest increments, leaving artists and writers who came to see over centuries. Painters, poets, and photographers have been drawn here. They have tried to capture what the eye sees and the heart feels. The vastness, the simplicity, the tension between stability and change. The cliffs do not perform. They do not care if they are painted in oil, sketched in charcoal, or caught in a camera lens. But the human need to keep their image is part of the same impulse that drives us to photograph sunsets, to write about the first snowfall, to preserve a moment we know will inevitably change. The hidden world beneath the surface, what you see above the tideline, is only part of the story. Beneath the waves, the chalk extends downward into a world of shadows and currents. Here, the stone is sculpted by forces you cannot see. Tunnels and arches form over decades, sometimes collapsing into piles of rubble that slowly grind into chalk pebbles, then into sand, and finally into the fine suspended particles that give coastal water its pale turquoise tint on sunny days. Colors that shift with the weather. The white of the cliffs is never the same twice. Under a midday sun, it is almost blinding. At dawn, it takes on the soft pinks and golds of the sky. In stormlight, it can appear almost blue-gray, its brightness muted by the clouded air. The sea below reflects these changes. On clear days, the water gleams with an almost tropical hue where the chalk dust floats near the shore. In rough weather, it darkens to green and steel, making the cliffs appear even more luminous by contrast. A living borderline standing here. It's easy to think of the cliffs as a wall, a separation between land and sea. But in truth, they are a bridge between two worlds, born of the ocean, shaped by the air, and destined to return to the water. Every collapse is not just loss, it is the chalk returning to where it began, becoming part of the seabed once again, ready to start the cycle over in a measure of time we cannot grasp. Time has many tools, but along the chalk coastline, its hands are the wind, the rain, and the eternal reach of the sea. You don't see them working in the span of a single glance. You could stand for an hour, watching the waves slide in and out, and believe the cliffs are unchanging. But erosion is patient. T doesn't need your notice. K, it works in the quiet, in the spaces between tides. K, in the nights when storms move unseen over the horizon. The first touch every journey of collapse begins. Gently, salt water, creeping up with the tide, finds a seam in the chalk. It might be a tiny crack, a fracture left from the last freeze of winter, or a space where a flint nodule has fallen away. Wave after wave, the water presses in. It carries sand, grit, and broken shells, a natural sandpaper that rubs and grinds against the soft surface. What begins as a narrow line becomes a hollow, and what was once a solid base begins to thin. The invisible work of rain chalk is porous. It drinks water as easily as dry earth swallows. A sudden downpour, when rain falls, seeps deep into the cliff face, trickling through tiny channels that wind unseen from the top to the base. In summer, its water may slowly evaporate, leaving the cliff no weaker than before. But in winter, the water trapped inside can freeze. Ice expands, and in that expansion, it pushes the chalk apart, like fingers prying open a sealed box. These tiny expansions become the starting point for greater breaks, and once the chalk's strength is breached, the rest is only a matter of time. Wind, the silent sculptor wind, does not seem destructive. It arrives invisible, felt only in the sway of grass, the tug at your coat. But wind is never truly empty-handed. It carries grains of salt from the ocean, minute crystals of sand from distant shores. It carries dust, pollen, and sometimes the dried fragments of shells broken to powder by the sea over years and decades. K. These particles rub against the cliff face, smoothing edges here, sharpening ridges there, leaving faint patterns like brushstrokes in an ongoing work of natural art. The slow collapse when enough of the base is worn away. Gravity begins to lean in. A section of cliff may appear stable, the grass still growing on top, footpaths still marked out, a fence standing solid. But inside, the chalk is hollowed, weakened. It bears its own weight until one day it no longer can. The fall is sudden. Sometimes it's silent until the final moment, and then a deep, heavy roar as thousands of tons of stone drop into the waiting water. The sea's relentless rhythm after a collapse. The sea takes over the work. Large blocks of chalk crash into the surf, some breaking instantly, others rolling in the shallows until they split under the endless push of the tide. Within weeks, what fell as solid white walls become scattered pieces, each smaller than the last. Years later, the remains may be no more than chalk dust, floating invisibly in the water, or settling quietly on the seabed. Erosion as a storyteller, every curve in the cliff face, every cove, every stack of stone standing alone in the surf. All are lines in a story written by erosion. The arches you see in photographs, those dramatic windows cut through rock, they are not permanent. They are pauses in the process, brief shapes formed on the way to becoming rubble. The smooth, sweeping bays between headlands are the sea's handwriting, spelling out the slow surrender of land to water. A cycle older than the cliffs themselves. Chalk cliffs are ancient, millions of years in the making, but erosion is older still. Before the chalk was chalk, before the land was land, the sea was carving, wearing away whatever surface rose before it. The materials change, the shapes change, but the process is eternal. Human eyes, on a long timeline, it is difficult for us, creatures who measure life in decades, to truly see the movement of the cliffs. You can visit the same spot year after year and notice no difference, but compare photographs taken a century apart, and the change is undeniable. A headland gone, a cove widened, a path erased. For scientists, erosion is not just a natural process, it is a kind of clock. By measuring the retreat of the cliffs, they read the passing of time in meters rather than minutes. The double-edged beauty. There's a strange beauty in erosion's work. The freshly fallen chalk glows brighter than the weathered surface it replaces. Caves open to the sea, beckoning with their shadows. New shapes emerge, curves, angles, and overhangs that no human hand could carve so perfectly. But this beauty comes at a cost. What is gained in form is lost in stability. Every new arch is already a ruin in waiting. The role of climate change in recent decades, storms have grown more intense. Rain falls in heavier bursts. Waves strike with greater force. For the cliffs, this means the slow work of erosion is quickening. Sections that might have stood for another century now collapse within decades. The sea's handwriting has become bolder, its sentences shorter, its chapters moving faster toward the inevitable end. Standing in the presence of slow change too. Stand before the cliffs is to stand before a process you cannot stop and cannot hurry. The wind will move past you. The waves will continue their rhythm. The rain will fall and seep and freeze, whether you watch or not. You may leave, but the work will go on without you, as it has for millennia. The comfort in impermanence there is a quiet comfort in knowing that even something so seemingly solid is part of a larger cycle. The chalk that falls into the sea will, in time, become sediment, then stone, then perhaps another cliff on another coastline. Millions of years from now, nothing is truly lost, only changed, reformed, returned, turned. The sea has always had teeth. 'Tis always bitten at the edge of the land. But in this age, the teeth are sharper, and the bite comes more often. The winds rise higher than they once did. Rain comes in sudden, heavy bursts instead of long, gentle showers. The storms you knew as a child seem smaller now, or perhaps 'tis the storms of today that have grown into something else entirely. The new weight of the wind wind is no longer a passing visitor. It arrives with purpose, its voice deeper, its force greater. When it sweeps over the sea, it gathers waves like an army, driving them forward with a relentless command. Each wave that crashes at the foot of the cliffs is a hammer blow, breaking chalk, grain by grain. The wind carries salt far inland now, leaving a taste on your lips even when you stand fields away from the shore. It seeps into soil, burning the edges of leaves, leaving its signature on everything it touches. Rain that works like a knife chalk, soft and thirsty, takes in every drop of rain. In years past, the rain might have fallen in fine, steady lines, slipping quietly into the earth. But now the skies open suddenly, emptying themselves in minutes, forcing water into every crevice. The sheer weight of it pushes deeper into the cliffs than before. It works like a knife, not cutting in a single strike, but sinking slowly with each repetition, making the unseen fractures wider and the hidden voids larger. When the cold comes, that water freezes in place and the ice swells, turning those cracks into open wounds. The storm tides there is a difference between a high tide and a storm tide. A high tide arrives on schedule, obedient to the pull of the moon. A storm tide ignores such quiet rhythms. It surges beyond the ordinary reach, driven by wind that piles the sea higher and higher, pushing it over beaches, over seawalls, to the very foot of the cliffs. When the waves strike, they do so not only with height, but with weight. Thousands of tons of water slamming into chalk, already softened by rain. One night at this can undo years of stability. Storms that remember a storm leaves its mark long after the skies clear. The rainwater it poured into the cliffs may take weeks to drain away. The salt it left behind in the soil may cling for months, and the rocks loosened by its waves may not fall until the quietest of days, long after you've stopped thinking about the last gale. This is the hidden memory of storms. Their work continues in silence. In the spaces between their visits, the amplifier called climate change scientists speak in measured tones about rising sea levels, warmer oceans, and changing weather patterns. But the cliffs feel it without debate. Warmer seas feed stronger storms. Higher tides let those storms reach further up the base of the cliffs, on the chalk, which has withstood millennia, now faces a pace of attack it has never known before. A century of erosion may now unfold in a few decades. The line between land and sea shifts more quickly. It's if the map is being redrawn by an impatient hand. When the sky and sea work together, most dangerous moments come when heavy rain and strong seas arrive as partners. The rain weakens the cliffs from above, saturating and splitting the chalk. The waves strike from below, removing what little foundation remains. It is a double assault, and the cliffs, for all their height, cannot fight back. One moment the ground feels solid underfoot. The next, it is gone, sliding downward in a roar of falling stone and rising spray. The winter gales winter along. The coast is a season of waiting for the next gale. Some arrive with a warning. Cloud banks stacked like dark walls on the horizon, wind lines shivering across the water surface. Others come in stealth, rolling in overnight, so that you wake to find the sea already in a fury, white with foam, and the air so thick with salt that every breath feels like a swallow of brine. The cliffs endure each one, but always with a cost. After the storm passes, you can walk along the shoreline and see fresh scars where the sea has taken its share. How people measure the change locals will tell you the cliffs are falling faster now. They remember when a certain rock outcrop jutted far into the water, or when the path to the headland stood safely back from the edge. Now those landmarks are gone, or stand perilously close to the dropped. Scientists measure it more precisely. Laser scans, drone surveys, and before and after images that lay the truth bare. The cliffs retreat by feet, sometimes by yards, in the aftermath of the most severe storms. The illusion of permanence. The cliffs seem eternal when the weather is calm. Visitors photograph them, paint them, write about their stillness. But storms strip away that illusion. In the space of a single night, a shape that has stood for generations can vanish. All that remains is a heap of white rubble at the base, already being rolled and broken by the tide, its bright edges fading with each passing wave. Nature's editing process. Think of the cliffs as a manuscript, millions of years in the making. The storms are the editors, cutting lines, removing entire paragraphs, reshaping the story. And though the edits may seem brutal, they are part of the natural rhythm. Without storms, there would be no dramatic shapes, no hidden coves, no sea arches catching the light. The same force that destroys also creates. The human response communities along the coast have learned to adapt in small ways. Footpaths are rerouted further inland. Warning signs go up, advising people not to walk too close to the edge after heavy rain or strong winds in some places. Sea walls and rock armors are built to take the brunt of the waves. But these defenses are expensive, and they can only protect certain stretches. The rest is left to nature. There's also an unspoken truth. No wall lasts forever. Eventually, the sea finds a way around or over it. The storms yet to come weather patterns suggest the storms will not grow gentler. The future holds more energy in the air, more heat in the sea, and more force in the waves. The cliffs will feel every bit of it. And though their fall may seem slow to you in the language of geology, this is a sprint. What stands today may not stand for your grandchildren. The paradox of beauty and destruction a storm can be terrifying, but from a safe distance, it is also mesmerizing. The cliffs gleam under flashes of lightning, The roar of the waves becomes a kind of music. Spray rises high, catching the light in ghostly veils. You watch, knowing the same beauty is also the force that takes the land away. This is the paradox of the coast. You cannot separate its loveliness from its danger. Some winters are quiet. The sea rolls in slow gray swells. The wind speaks in low murmurs, and the cliffs stand untouched. But every so often, a winter arrives with the intent to change everything. It begins subtly, a damp chill in the air that never quite leaves, a sense that the cold is waiting for the right moment to show its full weight. The first frost always starts gently. One morning, you wake to find the grass silvered over each blade, stiff and brittle under a thin skin of ice. The chalk cliffs, pale as bone, gleamed faintly under the low sun, their faces traced with tiny rivulets of frozen water, like the veins in marble. At first, it seems harmless beautiful, even. Frost feels light, like lace on stone. But frost is only the first whisper of winter's plans. The air carries more moisture now, and each night, temperatures drop just enough to turn that moisture into a thin, crystalline armor that clings to every surface. The daylight, the ice softens and drips, slipping deep into cracks you can't see. By night, it hardens again, and with each cycle, those cracks stretch just a little wider. The hidden work of ice chalk is porous, sponge made of the pressed remains of countless ancient sea creatures. It drinks water greedily, holding it deep within its structure. When the freeze comes, the water trapped inside expands. This expansion is slow, patient, but unstoppable. You can't hear it happening, you can't see it from the surface, but inside the cliff, the frozen water pushes apart grains that have sat locked together for millions of years. In some places, tiny fractures turn into hairline cracks. In others, hairline cracks turn into gaping seams. And though the cliff still stands, its strength is being quietly stolen. Storms in the dead of winter. By mid-January, the winter has grown teeth. Storms roll in from the Atlantic with a frequency that feels relentless. Each one carries sleet, hail, and bitter rain, water in every form. Thrown sideways by wind, the sea below roars with the force of the wind behind it. The waves do not simply arrive and retreat. They leap against the base of the cliffs, pounding again and again as if trying to shake the land loose from itself. From above, the wind tears at the cliff edge, lifting away grains of chalk and flinging them inland. From below, the sea claws at the foundation, grinding stones into the deep. This is the winter's two-pronged attack, and the cliffs have no choice but to endure it. The day the ice went deep one night stands out above all others. The temperature drops suddenly, far below the usual coastal lows. The air is so still it feels unnatural, as if the world is holding its breath. The moisture inside the cliffs freezes hard, not just near the surface, but deep within the rock. By morning, the cliffs seem the same, but they are filled with tension, their very structure under strain. The ice inside is a silent wedge, ready to break apart anything that resists. It is this deep freeze that sets the stage for what will happen next. The thaw that triggered collapsed thaws are supposed to be gentle, a slow loosening of winter's grip. But this year, the thaw arrives violently. Warm winds sweep in from the south, carrying rain that falls heavy and warm onto the frozen cliffs. The ice trapped inside melts rapidly, leaving behind open space where it once was. Without that frozen pressure, the weakened sections lose what little cohesion they had. Water rushes into these new gaps, making the chalk heavy, sodden, unstable. And then, all at once, gravity finishes what the frost began. The collapse there is. No warning for those who aren't listening closely. The first sound is a deep, muted crack, more felt than heard. Then comes the roar, low at first, growing into a thunder that drowns out the wind and sea. A whole section of cliff face, hundreds of tons of chalk, shears away in a single movement. It falls in slow motion to the eye, but in truth, it is over in seconds. The impact sends a wall of spray outward, a plume of white dust upward, and leaves behind a raw, fresh scar where smooth cliff once stood. The sea takes the fallen chalk, instantly rolling boulders in its grip, grinding them to smaller and smaller pieces. The silence, after once the dust settles, the silence is strange. The waves return to their rhythm. The wind moves as before, but the shape of the coast is forever changed. What was once a continuous edge now has a jagged gap. What was once the ground under someone's feet is now part of the seabed, and though it feels sudden, you know this was not the work of a single night. It was the result of weeks, months, years of patient weakening, the human witnesses for those who live near the edge. Such a winter is unforgettable. Fishermen out at sea see the collapse from a distance, a sudden cloud of chalk dust rising into the air, visible for miles. Walkers on the coastal paths find their familiar routes gone, cut short by fresh emptiness. Some stand at the new edge and peer down into the rubble, feeling the strange mix of awe and loss. For many, there is also fear, because if this much can fall at once, what else is waiting to go? The records and the maps scientists mark the collapse on their charts. They record GPS coordinates, measure the new angles of the cliff face, compare photographs from before and after in their data. This winter's collapse is one entry among many, part of a long pattern showing an acceleration of erosion on maps. The coastline shifts slightly inland, a small change to the casual eye, but a permanent one nonetheless. The lessons of that winter, the winter that broke the edge, teaches the same lesson the sea has been whispering for centuries. Nothing is fixed. Stone can fall. Paths can vanish. The line between land and water is always temporary. The cliffs, as grand as they are still only the latest chapter in the coastline's long and changing story. The slow acceptance people learn to live with the loss. They walk new paths further inland. They take their photographs from safer ground. Some speak of the collapse as a tragedy, others as a reminder that nature is not ours to keep still. And in quiet moments, when the sea is calm and the winter sun hangs low, they look at the fresh face of the cliff and see it for what it is, both an ending and a beginning. There was a time when the clifftop paths felt eternal, worn smooth by the feet of walkers, threading along the edge like a ribbon. They carried the weight of countless journeys, romantic strolls, solitary reflections, childhood adventures, chasing the cry of gulls, but along a coast that moves. Even the paths cannot keep their promises. The first signs sat first. The changes are subtle. A signpost leans a little toward the sea. Bench, once set far from the edge, now offers a view directly into the drop. Grasses that once grew thick along the path begin to thin where the soil shifts underfoot. On windy days, you notice small stones tumbling from the edge, rolling down into nothingness before vanishing in the foam. You think little of it, a natural shedding, perhaps. But those stones are whispers from the future, a path that remembers every footstep. Some of these paths are older than the people walking them. Centuries of shepherds, coastal watchmen, and Sunday ramblers have followed the same line. Over time, the very earth remembers the habit of footsteps. The grass grows differently where people tread. The soil compacts into a faint hollow that remains, even after seasons of disuse. But memory alone can't hold the ground together. The cliff edge creeps inward. At the paths, faithful as they are, follow it until they have nowhere left to go. The sudden cutoff, it happens in moments. 1 week, the path is whole, the horizon unbroken. The next, you return and find a bright, raw slice of earth where the land has simply stepped away. Now the path ends abruptly at a sheer drop. One more step would mean nothing beneath your feet. The soil at the break is fresh. It's pale chalk and clay, exposed like the inside of a fruit. You can see where the roots of grasses and small flowers hang limp into the air. Their lifelines severed for those who walked here often. This is more than an inconvenience. It's the loss of a familiar rhythm, a punctuation in the sentence of the land. The signs and the fences once. A collapse takes a section of path. The response is swift. Wooden stakes are driven into the soil, bright warning tape fluttering between them. Sometimes a low fence is built, not to stop the sea, but to stop the curious from stepping too close. The signs read, danger, unstable cliffs. They are stark, functional, without poetry, but they carry the unspoken message. This land is no longer yours to walk, and behind the signs. The earth begins its slow surrender to wind, rain, and salt, the vanishing roots of memory for locals. Each lost path is a vanishing thread in the weave of the place. That shortcut between two fields gone, the narrow track that curved just enough to reveal the lighthouse gone. Elderly residents remember walks taken decades ago, and the edge was far enough away that you could not hear the crash of the waves from above. Now the sound is constant, because the sea has moved closer, and the land has moved back. Tourists at the edge for visitors. A collapsed path is often a curiosity. They stand at the barrier, phones in hand, snapping photos of the drop. But even they sense something deeper, a quiet awareness that the ground beneath them is not as solid as it seems. They may not say it aloud, but they walk back from the edge a little more carefully than before. The quiet work of rain. Not all erosion is dramatic. Some paths fade in silence, their endings written not in sudden collapses, but in the steady work of rain. Chalk and soil are not impervious to water. Heavy downpours soak the earth, loosening its grip. Small rivulets carve away at the edges of the path, leaving shallow grooves that widen over seasons. Eventually, sections of path sag toward the cliff like tired shoulders. One morning, without fanfare, a section simply slides away, leaving a gap no one dares to cross. The grass that moves. Back nature adapts. Where a path is lost, grasses creep in from the sides, softening the scar with green. Wildflowers take root in the disturbed soil, their colors briefly bright before the next collapse. Over years, the land reshapes itself, and the memory of the old path becomes a faint rise in the grass. Then nothing at all. The choice, rebuild or retreating. Some places, authorities choose to reroute the path inland. The new route may be less scenic, less direct, but it preserves the connection between places and others. The decision is to let it go entirely, to allow the sea its space and accept that not every path can be replaced. This choice is often a balance between safety, cost, and sentiment. But sentiment alone cannot hold back the tide. Stories carried away there. It's a certain kind of story that clings to paths. Tales of proposals, of wartime patrols, of friends racing along the edge in the golden light of evening wind. When a path disappears, these stories lose their anchor. They still exist, but they become harder to imagine without the physical place to hold them. Some people keep the memory alive in photographs, sketches, or in the way they tell the story again and again. Others let the stories go with the land, folding them into the larger truth that nothing remains unchanged. When the land says enough, you might think of the disappearing pathways as theft, the sea stealing what belongs to you. But the land has its own logic. It does not hold itself in place for human convenience. When the cliff edge retreats, it is not an act of malice or carelessness. It is simply the continuation of a process that began long before the first path was cut. We draw our lines across the earth, but the earth is under no obligation to honor them. Watching the future unfold for those who live along these coasts. Watching the paths vanish becomes part of the yearly cycle, like the changing of seasons. It is expected, even if it still carries a sting. There is a strange peace in this. When you know the land is temporary, begin to see its beauty differently, as something to be enjoyed now. It's not preserved in the illusion of permanence, and so people still walk the remaining paths. Stay pause at the safe edges, look out at the endless gray blue water, and feel the quiet hum of time at work. They look peaceful, almost timeless. Clusters of stone cottages and red-tiled roofs, church spires rising above hedgerows, pubs with the names that speak of the sea. From a distance, you'd never guess these villages live under a slow sentence. Their fate written not by politics or markets, but by the quiet hunger of the coastline. A life built on the cliff. Many of these places were founded because of the sea. The high ground gave safety from flooding. The vantage point allowed fishermen to read the weather, and the nearness of the water meant a livelihood was always within reach. Generations were born, married, and buried here. Children learned to tell the time by the tide, to read the winds in the way the smoke leaned from a chimney. When your whole life has been measured against the same horizon, you imagine it will always be there. The view that moves closer at first. The changes are subtle. A field that once separated a house from the cliff loses a sliver to a winter storm. The line of the garden fence is moved inward. A tool shed is taken down before it can be taken by the wind. But as the years pass, the pace quickens. The distance between doorstep and drop shrinks like a candle burning low. Some houses wake one morning to find that what was once a wide lawn is now a strip of grass barely wider than the front path. The unwelcome mathematics of retreat surveyors visit. They take measurements, compare them to old maps, and tell residents what they already suspect at the current rate. A house may have 10 years left, 5, maybe, before the ground beneath it gives way. It is a strange kind of countdown, one where the numbers are written not on a clock, but in the way the earth falls to the sea. The weight of decision when a house is declared too close to the edge. The choice comes, stay and risk, or leave and lose. For some, the decision is forced. Insurance policies are withdrawn. Banks refuse to renew mortgages. The cost of maintaining a doomed property becomes too heavy to bear. Others refuse to move, not out of denial, but because they cannot imagine waking up anywhere else. The stories. In the walls, every home here holds a personal atlas, marks on the kitchen door frame where children's heights were recorded. A shelf worn smooth by the same teapot, lifted every morning. A view from the bedroom window that has framed 1,000 sunrises and storms. When the land beneath such a place disappears, it is not just architecture that is lost. It is memory, folded into the waves. The ghost streets send some villages. The retreat has been going on so long that whole streets have vanished. Locals speak of roads that no longer exist, where the post office once stood, where the school playground used to echo with voices on old photographs. You see the familiar buildings, but behind them the land extends farther, green and solid, as if mocking the present-day emptiness. Watching the sea from the pool of the pub, often the heart of the village, becomes a place where these changes are narrated over pints of ale. People speak of last week's collapse, the way a fence disappeared overnight, or how a neighbor woke to find the cliff only a few meters from his shed. The stories are told without panic, but with the resigned humor of people who have learned to live with the edge. The economics of a moving border property prices in these villages are strange things. A cottage with a sea view is desirable until that view is too close. Some buyers gamble, hoping to enjoy the place for a decade and sell before the risk becomes reality. Others see the purchase as temporary, a chapter in a life that will eventually move inland. But there are also those who, by knowing they will be the last to live there, accept in the end as part of the bargain. When the road falls, or we access itself can vanish. A road that once connected the village to the next town becomes fractured by subsidence, its tarmac sagging toward the cliff. Eventually, barriers go up and traffic is diverted miles inland. So what was once a quick drive to the shops becomes a long loop through unfamiliar lanes. The village feels just a little more isolated, as if the sea, in taking the land, has also taken some of its connections. The relocation of a village in extreme cases. Entire communities have been moved. Houses are dismantled, stone by stone, and rebuilt farther from the brink. It is an act of defiance against erosion, but also an admission that the original place is lost. The new location may be safer, but the air smells different, the sound of the waves is fainter, and the sense of living on the edge, both dangerous and exhilarating, is gone. Nature's slow reclamation once a house is abandoned. Nature moves in quickly. Roof tiles slip under the weight of storms. Windows cloud with salt, and ivy climbs the walls as if trying to pull the structure back into the earth. Eventually, the house collapses into itself, and the cliff takes the remains without ceremony from the sea. It is just another piece of chalk breaking away into the water. Children growing up with the edge for children here. The cliff is both playground and warning. Parents teach them early which paths are safe and which to avoid. They grow up knowing the land changes shape, that the map of their village will not be the same when they are adults. Some leave and never return, preferring a world where the ground feels permanent. Others stay, drawn back by the unique rhythm of life at the edge, the endless vigil in every village. There are those who watch the cliff closely, not because they can stop it, but because knowing when it changes feels like a kind of control. They walk the same stretches daily, note the new cracks in the soil, and measure in paces how far it is from the edge to the old oak tree. When the collapse comes, they are rarely surprised. A kind of acceptance. Over time, the fear softens into a strange companionship. The sea is not an enemy, just a restless neighbor. Living here becomes an act of coexistence, with the knowledge that one day the neighbor will take your home without malice, simply because that is its nature. And until then, the people of these villages go on mending roofs, planting gardens, and watching the horizon as if it is the only clock that matters. The sea does not rush, does not claw at the land in rage, nor tear at it in sudden fits of violence. At least, not most of the time. Its hunger is quiet, waits, lapping at the foot of the cliffs, day after day. Its reach no farther than the rhythm of the tide allows. But over years, its patience is unmatched. What it cannot take in one season, it will take in 10. What resists for a decade will surrender in a century. The sea is always there, always eating and never full. The first bite is always small. In a calm summer afternoon, you might stand on the shingle beach and hear nothing but the soft, foamy sigh of waves. They touch the cliff's base like fingertips on a drum, barely enough to shift the stones scattered there. But each touch carries something, a grain of sand, a fragment of shell that acts as a file against the chalk, day after day. These tiny abrasions become channels, then hollows, then caves, just large enough for the water to swell into them. It is not destruction in the way you think of it. It is the slowest kind of crafting, shaping, softening, removing one layer to reveal the next. The seasons of eating. The sea changes its appetite with the seasons. In summer, it works with the delicacy of a patient sculptor, its energy gentled by warm weather and calm winds. It smooths the base of the cliff, sending clear water swirling into small pools, teasing pebbles into dance. But in winter, especially in a winter with storms, storm surges crash against the cliffs with the force of 1,000 hammers, shoving rocks and shingle forward, as if to help break the cliff's knees. Waves climb higher, hitting the chalk with sprays that freeze overnight, then melt in the morning sun, breaking bonds deep inside the stone. In these months, The sea doesn't just nibble, it devours. Salt in the wound. Every drop of seawater carries salt, and salt is a quiet saboteur. When the tide rises and falls, it leaves behind a thin crust of crystals inside the cliff's porous face. These crystals expand and contract with changes in temperature, pushing the chalk apart, grain by grain. The next wave needs only to brush against what was already loosened to carry it away forever. The process is invisible until it isn't. Until a large slab shears off with a crack like splitting ice and plunges into the waves below. The constant rearranging of the shore beneath the cliffs. The shoreline is always in motion. Boulders fall, and the sea rolls them over itself, grinding their edges down, turning them from sharp fragments into smooth cobbles. Sand shifts with every tide, building small beaches one day and pulling them away the next. For the people who walk here, it means that the familiar is never fixed. A rock you used as a landmark one summer might be gone by the next, swallowed by the deeper water. How the cliff listens to the waves. The chalk itself seems to hear the sea. Every wave sends a tremor through the rock, a vibration felt deep in its core. Scientists who measure such things have found that these vibrations weaken the cliff over time, much like how the steady beat of a drum might loosen the dust from an old ceiling. The sea doesn't just break the cliff from the outside, it whispers into it, loosening its resolve from within. The power of the rare storm. For all the talk of patience, there are moments when the sea acts suddenly, reminding you that it can take in minutes what usually takes years. A single storm, if timed with the high tide, can send whole sections of cliff collapsing. The debris tumbles into the shallows, momentarily building a barrier that slows the water's reach. But the sea is not deterred. It works around the obstacle, pulling at it, until the stones are small enough to carry away. The partnership of rain and sea. The sea does not work alone. It has an accomplice. Rain. When storms roll in from the Atlantic, rain falls for days, soaking into the chalk like water into a sponge. The cliff becomes heavier, its weight straining against itself. When the tide comes in during such times, the sea finds the cliff ready to yield. Together, rain from above and waves from below take their share. The illusion of stillness to most who visit. The cliffs appear motionless. Tourists take photographs, believing the scene to be eternal. The human mind finds it hard to imagine that something so grand could be temporary. But if you were to stand here for 100 years, a single afternoon, to the cliff, you would see the difference. You would see the shoreline creep inland, the edges soften, tamed, the white walls retreat. The appetite for the long game. The sea's greatest strength is its ability to wait. It does not need to win today or this century. It can take its time because it knows the land has no escape, and in that certainty, it becomes relentless. It will keep eating until the last chalk has fallen, till the green fields above are nothing but open water. The trade between land and sea. Yet, this is not only loss. What the sea takes, it also transforms. The chalk it eats becomes the fine, white sand that settles in quiet coves. The fossils, freed from the cliffs, become treasures on the beach, carried home in the pockets of children. Even in destruction, there is creation. The human gaze from the safety of the clifftop path. You might feel detached from the process. It is happening below you, beyond the reach of your step, but stand too close, and you hear it, the faint crumble as a small section falls, sharp clap as it hits the rocks below. It is in those moments you understand the sea's appetite is not some abstract, poetic force. It is real, it is near, and it is always working. Night, work at night. The sea eats in darkness. No one sees the small collapses, the pebbles pulled from the base. The way a storm tide cuts a little deeper into a cave. By morning, you notice only the results, a new pile of debris, a darker scar on the cliff face, a path fenced off because the ground is no longer safe. The work is quiet, but the progress is sure. The promise of return what is taken now will return in another form, as sediment drifting along the coast, feeding distant beaches, building sandbanks that may one day become new land. It is all part of a cycle that does not care for the ownership of maps or the placement of boundary stones. The sea takes, can the sea gives, but never to the same place. When you stand at the cliff edge and look out toward the horizon, you are not just looking at water. You are looking at a graveyard, though not one marked by stone or flowers. Beneath those restless waves lie fields and meadows that once rolled green under the wind, villages where the smoke of hearth fires rose each morning, and paths that once carried footsteps to the shore. They are gone now, swallowed not in an instant, but over centuries. The ocean claimed them quietly, and now their only markers are lines on old maps and stories half remembered in coastal towns. Land, for the Cid, it's hard to picture a time when the sea was farther away. But the land once stretched well beyond the line you see today. Herds grazed where gulls now wheel. Farmers planted wheat and barley on soil that now lies beneath several meters of water. In some places there were forests. Trees grew in the salty wind, their roots deep in chalk and clay. When storms are fierce and the tide retreats far, you can sometimes see the ghost of those forests, blackened stumps, still rooted in place, as if waiting for a spring that will never come. The first losses, the people who lived on this coast centuries ago did not think of the sea as a predator. It was a provider, a place to fish, to gather shellfish, to trade with boats from other shores. When the first slivers of land fell away, it may have seemed like nothing. A little more beach here, a missing section of pasture there, but over time, the pattern revealed itself. The cliffs were creeping back, and the sea was creeping in villages that slipped away. There are places along the English coast where entire settlements no longer exist. Names remain in church records and old deeds stored in archives, but the places themselves are gone. The homes, the lanes, the wells, all swallowed. The sea rolling over them without a pause. Fishermen tell of feeling something hard under their nets in shallow water, not rocks, but the remains of walls that once stood on dry land. The sound of memory, you cannot hear the voices of the people who once lived there, but sometimes the sea seems to speak for them. On certain days, when the wind is right and the tide is pulling out hard, there is a hollow, echoing sound that rolls up from the base of the cliffs. It is only the waves in the caves, but it can feel like something older, like the land itself, remembering what it lost. The coastline that moved a coastline is not fixed. It is an ever-changing edge between two worlds. Old records show that in some places, the sea has moved inland by more than 100 meters in a single lifetime. In others, it advances slower, but still, it advances. The maps change, and with them, so do the borders of what is possible. Fields once considered safe are now perilously close to the brink. Houses built well away from danger are one bad winter away from the cliff edge. The bones of the past erosion times uncovers more than fossils. On rare occasions, human bones appear in the debris at the base of the cliff's remains from old graveyards that once lay inland, but now lie exposed to the tide. When this happens, the bones are collected and reburied farther inland, damped. But you cannot help but think of the generations whose resting places now lie under the sea. Lost roads and vanished paths. The sea's appetite takes more than homes and fields. It swallows the roots that connect people to each other. Footpaths, once worn by centuries of travel, stop suddenly at the edge of a drop. Old car tracks disappear into the air, their continuation erased. Even bridleways used for driving livestock now end at fences warning of unstable ground. What was once a journey to the next village is now impossible without a detour miles inland. The farmers Retreat farmers along the coast know the land is not theirs forever. Some have given up on the fight, moving fences back every few years to keep their livestock from grazing too close to danger. Others try to slow the loss, planting grass to hold the soil, piling stones at the base of the cliffs. But they know these measures are only pauses, not solutions. The sea is patient, and patience outlasts ownership. The ghost map in some coastal museums. You can find maps that show the land as it was centuries ago. Look closely, and you'll see roads leading straight into what is now open water, fields marked where only waves remain. These maps are records, but they are also a kind of mourning. Every black line of road, every shaded field, is a place that once had weight and life, now existing only in ink. Fishermen's tales. Some fishermen speak of hooking objects that don't belong to the sea. Wooden beams, iron fittings, even ceramic tiles pulled up from places where no land has been for generations. They are reminders that beneath the shifting waves lies a history, as rich as any found on shore, a history few will ever see. Shorelines in motion. The English coast is not unique in its losses. Around the world, shorelines move in and out like breathing. But here, where the cliffs are chalk, the retreat is both visible and dramatic. Each collapse is like a book closing its pages, unreadable once they touch the water. In some places, locals can remember where the coast was in their childhood. When they visit now, they stand far back from the edge, looking over water where once there was grass underfoot. The last light of a village there is a story of one small village, long since gone, where the church stood until the very end. Each year, the cliff came closer, but still, the bell rang for Sunday service. The day the church fell, it was not during a storm, but on a clear morning. The sound of its stones hitting the beach carried far out to sea. Fishermen say that for weeks afterward, you could hear the bell under the waves when the tide was right, a sound that faded with time until it was gone completely. The permanence of lost once. The sea takes land. It does not give it back. There are rare cases where sandbanks form and beaches grow, but the kind of land the sea eats from the cliffs is gone for good. The chalk dissolves into the water, scattered over wide distances. The fields and buildings it once supported exist only in memory. The invisible border standing at the edge, you can almost feel the boundary between now and then. The waves that break at your feet once broke far away. 8. At the edge of fields and villages long gone. It is a reminder that the ground beneath you is temporary, that what feels like the stable center of your world is only the current edge of a long retreat. The weight of knowing for those who live here, knowledge of the past, shapes how they see the present. They understand that their homes, their gardens, their streets are part of a landscape that will one day be gone. It changes the way they think about permanence, about ownership, about what it means to belong to a place, memory carried by water even when the land is gone. The water carries its memory. Tiny fragments of chalk drift in the current, turning the shallows pale on bright days. Fossils tumble in the surf, smoothed by years of rolling dot. In the end, the lost land does not disappear entirely. It becomes part of the sea itself, folded into its endless motion. When a section of chalk cliff falls, it feels sudden to the eye, a roar of stone, a plume of dust, and then silence. But hidden inside that silence is a release that has been millions of years in the making, because within that chalk are the remains of creatures that lived long before the first human set foot here. The collapse is not just destruction, it is also unveiling. The ocean's first architects, the chalk cliffs, were built not by storms or tectonics, but by the smallest architects imaginable. Microscopic plankton, drifting in warm seas millions of years ago, lived brief lives and then fell to the ocean floor, layer upon layer. Their tiny calcium shells settled in silence, compacting over eons into the soft white stone we now see as cliffs. Inside that stone, fragments of larger life became trapped ammonites with spiraling shells, sea urchins with perfect symmetry, corals frozen mid-bloom. Each one is a time capsule, and each collapse of the cliff is like the turning of a page in a book written before our species existed. The moment of exposure, when the chalk breaks, does not release its treasures all at once. Freshly fallen blocks lie scattered at the base, their surfaces clean and pale, untouched by rain or salt. If you walk there in the hours after a fall, carefully, keeping far from the still unstable edge, you might see the outlines of fossils, standing out in relief, as if they have been waiting for this very moment to meet the sun again. Some are perfect, their shapes so clear you can imagine them alive. Others are fractured, split by the violence of the fall, their stories told in pieces. The patience of fossils are, in essence, patience turned to stone. They have waited millions of years in darkness, pressed between layers of chalk, until a storm, a frost, or a high tide sets them free. There is something humbling in the thought that the shell you pick up at the foot of the cliffs may have last seen daylight before the continents took their current shape. The shapes of the past. The most common fossil in the chalk is the sea urchin, though not the spiny, living kind you might find today. These are smooth, their patterns etched in faint star shapes, the imprint of an animal that died in seas long gone. You may also find belemnites, bullet-shaped remnants of squid-like creatures, their pointed ends still sharp enough to remind you they were hunters once. And then there are the ammonites, spiraled and intricate, each coil a record of growth, like the rings of a tree, but on a scale far older. The science in the stone for geologists and paleontologists. Each collapse is an opportunity. The freshly exposed faces of the cliff offer a glimpse into layers that have not been touched for tens of millions of years. By studying them, scientists can reconstruct the climate, the currents, and even the chemistry of the seas in which these creatures lived. They can tell, for example, when the oceans were warm enough for certain plankton to thrive, or when volcanic ash settled across the seabed after distant eruptions. The cliffs are not just scenery, they are an archive. Every collapse is like pulling a new volume from the shelf. Collectors at the base, when word of a major collapse spreads to fossil hunters, come. Some are amateurs with small hammers, carefully prying loose the shapes they recognize. Others are experts, kneeling with brushes and chisels, working with the precision of surgeons. They know the window is short. Once exposed, chalk weathers quickly. Rain softens it, tides grind it down, and soon the fossils either break free entirely or vanish back into the surf. The ethics of discovery. There is a quiet debate among those who collect fossils here. Some believe they should be taken and preserved before they are lost. Others argue they should remain in place, part of the natural cycle of erosion, to be found again by future generations. It is not an easy question. Every fossil removed is a fragment of the cliff story taken from its context, yet every fossil left risks being destroyed by the very forces that revealed it. Children of the cliffs for local children. Growing up near the chalk cliffs often means growing up with fossils in their pockets. A walk along the base after a storm might yield a handful of treasures, a perfect sea urchin here, a tiny shell embedded in chalk there. They learn, without anyone needing to tell them, that the land is old, and that it is always changing. In this way, the cliffs quietly educate, passing on their history through the hands that carry it home. The danger in beauty it is easy to be drawn to the fallen chalk, its clean white faces and the promise of discovery. But those who know the coast also know its danger. Cliff falls rarely happen in isolation. When one section gives way, others may follow. Even hours after a collapse, the air can still hum faintly with the sound of shifting stone. The safest view of a fossil is often from a distance, knowing that it will still be there when the tide has turned and the cliffs have settled. The fossils that never surface for every fossil freed by erosion, countless others, will never be seen. They will remain locked in the chalk until the cliff retreats enough to reveal them, and by then, the tide may claim them instantly. It is a reminder that what we know of the past is always incomplete, okay? We are seeing only fragments, and even those are chosen by chance. The connection across time holding a fossil in your hand. You are linked to a world that vanished before humans existed. You can imagine the creature alive, moving through warm, shallow seas, filtering plankton from the water, unaware of the long journey its remains would take. It is a strange comfort, its connection to something so ancient. It reminds you that life endures in many forms, and that even in death can be a kind of presence. The cliff's gift. Every collapse is a loss of land, a step closer to villages and paths being swallowed. But it is also a gift, offering U.S. glimpses of the deep past. The chalk does not hold back its secrets forever. It shares them in bursts, in moments of change, in the split second when gravity overcomes stone. And so, fossils are both warnings and offerings, reminders that all things pass, that stories can outlast the bodies that held them, returning to the sea eventually. Okay. Every fossil taken from the base of the cliffs meets one of two fates. Some are kept on shelves, mired and protected for years. Others are lost again, dropped, forgotten, or given away until they find themselves back in the tide. The sea, patient as always, does not mind. It will take them back and keep them until the next chance comes for someone else to find them. The chalk cliffs have been retreating for as long as there has been a coastline to retreat from. The process is as old as the land itself, and yet, in human terms, it has only recently been possible to measure it with any real precision. To the casual eye, the change is invisible. Stand at the edge today, then return next year, and it will look the same high white face, the same sweep of sea beneath. But measurements tell a different story. The line where land meets air is always in motion. It creeps backward, sometimes by inches, sometimes by yards, depending on how the seasons have treated it. The first attempts to measure long before satellites and laser scanning, coastal measurement was a craft of string, stakes, and patience. In the 19th century, surveyors would hammer wooden pegs into the grassy tops of the cliffs, aligning them with fixed points inland. Year after year, they would return to see how many pegs had vanished, toppled into the waves by falls. These early records were far from exact. A winter storm might erase months of apparent stability in one night, and the surveyor's logbook would show only 2 quiet entries, one marking the cliff safe, and the next noting that it had leaped backward several feet. The arrival of aerial eyes after the Second World War. A new kind of measurement appeared, photography from above. Planes traced the coastline, taking overlapping images that could be compared to earlier flights. For the first time, scientists could see the subtle scalloping of the cliff edge, the way certain curves and bays grew deeper year by year. It was still a slow process, because photographs had to be interpreted by hand. Men and women sat at long tables, leaning over stereoscopes, their eyes tracing the outlines of the land in 3-dimensional relief. The digital shift in recent decades. The tools have become sharper, faster, and more tireless. Light detection and ranging sends pulses of laser light from planes or drones, measuring the exact distance to the ground from millions of points per second. The result is a precise digital map of the cliff's surface, so detailed that even a few centimeters of change can be detected from one survey to the next. From these maps, scientists can create a moving portrait of the coastline, a kind of time-lapse in which years pass in seconds. The chalk breathes, shrinking back into the land behind it. Numbers that tell a story. Turns out the retreat is not uniform. Some stretches of chalk barely move at all for decades, holding their ground against the sea. Others crumble quickly, losing meters in a single collapse. In parts of East Sussex, average retreat rates of 20 to 40 centimeters per year have been recorded, but in certain winters, erosion leaps forward by 3 or 4 meters at once. And then there are the rare, catastrophic events, sections the size of small apartment blocks shearing off in one moment. The sound echoing across the water like a low, drawn-out crack of thunder. The silent years between dramatic collapses. There are long stretches of apparent calm. These are deceptive. Beneath the grass at the cliff top, water moves through cracks in the chalk, slowly widening them. Storm waves pound at the base, cutting small notches into the foot of the cliff. For years, nothing seems to happen, but all the while, the strength is being drained from within. Measurements taken in these quiet years show the edge creeping closer to inland markers, millimeter by millimeter, a slow theft of land that no eye can catch unaided. Why we measure, some might ask why. Keep track at all. After all, the cliffs have been falling since they were born, but for the people who live near them. Knowledge is a kind of shield. Measurements help planners decide where to place footpaths, how close new homes can be built to the edge, and when it's time to move existing structures before they are lost. They also help scientists forecast future change. By studying past erosion rates alongside weather records, researchers can begin to link collapses to storms, rainfall, and freeze-thaw cycles. The more data collected, the more accurate the predictions become. The human element in the records every dataset hides a human presence. Someone has to walk the cliff path with GPS equipment, stand in the wind with a tripod and camera, or fly the drone over the shimmering white edge. They return in all seasons in the sting of winter spray, in the humming heat of summer fields, gathering points and lines that will be fed into the growing archive of the coast. For them, the measurements are not abstract. They can point to a coordinate and remember the day they stood there, looking out over a section of cliff that no longer exists. The personal scale of loss to someone far from the coast. Erosion is a number in a report. To someone who walks the cliff path weekly, it is a change you can feel in your stride. A favorite bench now closer to the drop. A fence moved inland. A view altered by the absence of a curve of land you once thought permanent. Measurements put these feelings into figures, not to diminish them, to preserve the truth of what is happening, from local to global, what is learned on the chalk. Cliffs feeds into a larger understanding of coastlines worldwide. Erosion is not unique to England. From the limestone bluffs of Malta to the sandstone cliffs of Prince Edward Island, the same processes are at work: water, wind, frost, and time. But the chalk cliffs, with their softness and visibility, are like a laboratory in the open air. They reveal change faster than harder rock, making them a valuable early warning system for how coastlines may respond to shifting climates. Cliff collapse forecasting in the past decade. Researchers have begun using measurements not only to document falls, but to anticipate them by mapping microcracks in the cliff face, tracking wave energy, and modeling how storms penetrate the rock. They can sometimes predict which sections are most likely to fail in the coming months. It is not an exact science. The sea can surprise even the best models, but in some cases, the warnings have allowed authorities to close paths and move people away just days before a major collapse. The map that's always changing. Stand with a modern coastal erosion map in your hands, and you will see something strange. The lines marking the cliff edge do not form a single border. Instead, they run in parallel, one for each year of measurement. In some places, they are spaced closely together, showing years of slow change. In others, the lines are wide apart, like a calendar with pages torn out, land gone in sudden bites. This layered mapping is both beautiful and sobering. It shows, in colors and lines, the steady vanishing of a landscape that seems solid underfoot. What the numbers cannot tell for all their precision. Measurements cannot fully capture what the loss of land means. They cannot record the sound of a collapse echoing across the water or the smell of the sea after a fresh fall. Chalk dust hanging in the air. They cannot note the way your chest feels tight when you see a familiar path fenced off, knowing it will never be opened again. The data is necessary, but it is not the whole story. The rest lives in the memories of those who have walked the cliffs long enough to see the changes with their own eyes. The vanish in motion ultimately. To measure the vanish is to acknowledge it. It is to admit that no matter how iconic, no matter how photographed or painted, the chalk cliffs are temporary. The tide will go on eating at their base. Storms will gnaw at their faces, and the line between land and sea will keep shifting inland. But in measuring, we give shape to this inevitability. We turn it from a vague sense of loss into a recorded truth, preserved even as the land itself slips away. When a cliff collapses, the moment feels isolated. One sound, one fall, one plume of chalk dust dissolving into the sea breeze. But along this coast, nothing happens in isolation. Each break in the chalk sets the stage for the next dot, like dominoes, set in a patient line. The cliffs are linked by forces unseen. The weight shifts, the pressure changes. Water finds new paths into the cracks, and somewhere down the coast, the next fall quietly begins. The hidden connections on the surface, the chalk cliffs look like a single, unbroken wall. But beneath the grass, the geology is a network of joints, fractures, bedding planes, tiny fault lines that run for hundreds of meters. When a section collapses, shakes the neighboring chalk. The impact may loosen rubble at the base of the next cliff, or allow waves to reach places they couldn't before. In time, those small changes become weaknesses, a hollow here, a widened crack there, until another section lets go. This is the quiet chain reaction of the coast, the domino effect in slow motion, like the snap of real dominoes. The chain reaction of cliff erosion moves in slow motion. A single collapse may be followed by years of apparent calm, but every collapse changes the shape of the shoreline. It shifts how waves strike the base, how wind funnels through gullies, how rain drains through the cliff top. These changes ripple outward, and over time, the effects accumulate until another collapse becomes inevitable. It is erosion's version of cause and effect, not immediate, but certain. The power of exposure when a chunk of cliff falls away. It exposes fresh chalk to the elements. Chalk that may have been shielded for centuries now faces the sea directly, its pale face struck by waves day after day. Fresh chalk is softer, more porous, more willing to yield to frost and rain. This new vulnerability speeds the erosion, turning what might have been decades of slow wear into just a few short years before the next collapse, undercutting the neighbors at low tide. If you walk along the base of the cliffs where it's safe, you'll see the footprints of the sea's work, narrow notches cut into the base, sometimes only ankle deep, sometimes wide enough to walk inside. These undercuts form because waves now strike new angles after a collapse. The neighboring cliff faces, once partly sheltered, are suddenly exposed. The undercutting continues silently till the chalk above is hanging more over the sea than over the land. One day, without warning, gravity wins. The chain reaction in a storm season, sometimes the domino effect speeds up. In stormy winters, one collapse can follow another in quick succession. The first fall shakes loose debris. The debris is swept away by powerful tides. And the next section, now unsupported, breaks within weeks or even days to those who live nearby. These seasons fill relentless paths, closed warning signs, multiplying, each collapse seeming to invite the next. Nature's memory, it's tempting to think of each collapse as a disaster, an event to be prevented, but to the sea. These falls are simply the cliffs remembering what they are, temporary edges between land and water. The domino effect is nature's way of restoring balance. Where a sharp projection of land once stood, the falls wear it down to a smoother curve. Where the cliff once met the sea in a jagged line, the collapses rounded off over millennia. This process has shaped the entire coastline, giving it the sweep and rhythm you see today. The human footprint on the domino effect. We speed up the chain reaction without meaning to. Building too close to the edge adds weight where the chalk is already strained. Drainage ditches channel rainwater directly into fracture lines. Footpaths concentrate human traffic in places where the soil is thinnest. Even coastal defenses, meant to slow erosion, can unintentionally shift wave energy to other parts of the coast, making them erode faster. In this way, human presence becomes another piece in the domino chain. One more factor in the timing of the next collapse: the role of groundwater beneath the grass. Water is the quietest player in this chain reaction. When a section of cliff falls, it often changes the way rainwater and springs flow underground. Water may begin seeping into a new set of cracks, or draining more quickly toward the edge. In winter, this water can freeze, expanding and prying the cracks wider. When it thaws, the space remains ready to take in more water the next time it rains. Over years, this cycle works like a wedge, pushing the neighboring cliffs closer to collapse. Signs of a coming fall: if you know what to look for. You can sometimes see the domino effect in motion. New fissures appear in the grass near the edge, like pale scars in the green. Chunks of soil slump toward the sea. Small rockfalls begin to collect at the base, a prelude to something larger. Scientists walk these edges often, marking the cracks, photographing them, measuring their spread. In some cases, they can predict where the next domino will fall, but not always when. The reluctance of the next domino. Every cliff section gives way easily. Some stand stubbornly for decades after their neighbors have fallen. The joints within them may be tighter, the chalk drier, the base more shielded from direct wave impact, but the pressure builds quietly. A wet winter, a deep frost, or one powerful storm can tip the balance. When it happens, the fall may be far larger because of all the years the cliff resisted. The larger pattern look at a time lapse of the coastline over centuries, and the domino effect becomes clear. The cliffs retreat not as a straight line, but in a series of pulses, long stretches of relative stillness punctuated by sudden leaps inland. It is the rhythm of erosion, slow accumulation of weakness, then rapid release. Why the dominoes will keep falling there is no ending to this chain reaction, only pauses. The forces driving it, gravity, water, wave energy, are constants. Even if we could somehow freeze one section in place, the rest of the coastline would continue to move. And over time, the fixed section would become the outlier, undercut by changes on either side, until it, too, joined the sequence. Living along a line of falling dominoes for those who live here. Accepting the domino effect means understanding that the land itself is a moving thing. Boundaries drawn on maps are temporary. Paths will shift. Clifftop gardens will one day be fields, and fields will one day be sea. It is a slow motion migration, not of people, but of the land beneath them. Some choose to fight it, building defenses and barriers. Others choose to adapt, moving fences, relocating buildings, watching the edge without trying to hold it still. The poetry in the pattern there is, in its own way, a strange beauty to the domino effect. The knowledge that each cliff is connected to the next, that every fall is part of a larger, unending conversation between land and sea. It is a reminder that permanence is an illusion, and that even in loss, there is the shaping of something new. When you stand at the top of a chalk cliff, the wind in your hair and the sea below, it is easy to believe you are looking at something eternal. The white walls rise with a clean, unbroken face, as if they have always been here, and always will be. But the truth, spoken quietly in the language of tides and seasons, is that the cliffs you see today are already halfway to becoming memory. Their future is written in the same forces that built them: the gathering of ancient shells, the compression of soft chalk, the slow wearing down by water. And in that future, the sea will always have the last word, a future measured in centuries, not days. The collapse of a single cliff face makes the news. Headlines capture the drama. Massive section of white cliffs falls into the sea. But these events, as sudden as they seem, are just moments in a far longer timescale. The White Cliffs of Dover. The Seven Sisters of Sussex. They have been receding since their formation. In geological terms, they are young and still changing shape, still learning the outline they will carry into the next million years. From the human perspective, it is tempting to see this future as loss, as the disappearance of a national symbol, as a coastline slipping away. But to the earth, it is simply transformation. The cliffs will not vanish overnight to the imagination. Erosion can feel like a countdown, a race toward disappearance. But these cliffs are vast, their foundations deep, and their retreats slow, compared to the pace of human life. On average, the coastline here erodes by perhaps 20 to 40 centimeters per year. Some years bring larger collapses. Some years, almost nothing visible happens. But the math is simple. In a century, the edge may have moved tens of meters inland. That is enough to take footpaths, gardens, sometimes even houses. But the cliffs themselves, their towering faces and white glow in the sunlight, will remain long after our own lifetimes have passed. The shadow of climate change still. The speed of this transformation is changing. Warmer oceans, more frequent and intense storms, and rising sea levels all give the waves more reach and power. The winter storms of the future may bite deeper into the base of the cliffs, while heavy rains, more common in some seasons, will soak into the chalk more quickly, prying it apart from within. And when the sea level rises, the waves will strike the cliffs higher up, shortening the time it takes to undercut and topple. Section. This does not mean the cliffs will vanish in the next few generations, but it does mean their retreat will quicken. A process that once took centuries for a visible change may now show its progress in decades. What science predicts? Geologists use drones, laser scanning, and time-lapse photography to map the future of the cliffs. They create models, virtual coastlines, that march steadily inland, showing which sections will likely fall first. Some of these models predict that in 500 years, entire stretches of current clifftop fields will be gone. By then, the line of the coast may be dozens of meters farther back, with new faces of chalk exposed to the sea. In these projections, the famous views of today will be replaced by new ones, different angles, different heights, different curves, to the coastline. The cliffs will still be here, but they will be changed. The question of intervention. The cliffs are beloved. They are printed on postcards, painted by artists, written into poetry, and used as symbols of homecoming for sailors returning to port. With so much cultural weight, the idea of simply letting them erode can feel like neglect. And yet, the question of whether to try to stop the erosion is complicated. Engineering solutions, seawalls, rock armoring, cliff reinforcement can slow erosion in small areas, but they are costly, require constant maintenance, and often cause faster erosion elsewhere too. Save one section of cliff might mean sacrificing another, and even the strongest defenses cannot hold back the sea forever. For now, old scientists and local authorities agree. Intervention should focus on protecting human life and property, not on freezing the cliffs in time. The cliffs as a living, archiving as they retreat. The cliffs offer something they never did before, a constant unearthing of the past. With every collapse, new fossils and geological layers are revealed. The compressed remains of microscopic plankton, shell fragments from ancient seas, sometimes even the bones of prehistoric creatures. For paleontologists, Erosion is not just a loss, but a gift. It gives access to stories buried for millions of years. In this way, the cliffs are both disappearing and giving more of themselves away. The human landscape above the future of the cliffs is not just about rock and water. It is about the communities that live above them, villages that have stood for centuries near the edge may one day have to retreat. Footpaths may be rerouted inland. Historic lighthouses might need to be moved or abandoned. There will be choices to make. Preserve certain landmarks through engineering, or let them go gracefully to the sea. Some communities will fight to hold the line. Others will adapt to the shifting edge, turning the retreat itself into part of their local story. Tourism. In the future, few tourists will still come to see the white cliffs, whether they are standing where they do today or several meters farther inland. The view from the top will remain dramatic. The sea will still strike the base, and the sunlight will still catch the chalk and make it glow. But the paths may be shorter. The safe viewing points may be farther from the edge, Signs warning of collapse will likely be more common, and, perhaps, the stories told to visitors will shift from tales of defense and symbolism to stories of geological change and adaptation. The symbol will remain: the cliffs are not just physical. They are a symbol in the imagination. When people think of them, they see strength, clarity, resilience. These qualities do not depend on the exact line of the coastline. Even as the cliffs change shape, they will remain in songs, in literature, in the quiet sense of home they give to those who grew up near them. The future will not take that away. Learning from the cliffs to retreat of the cliffs holds a lesson that extends beyond the coast. It is a reminder that beauty is often temporary, and that the measure of care is not in how long we can keep something unchanged, but in how we live with its change. The chalk cliffs have stood for millions of years. They will stand for millions more, just not in the same place or in the same form. They invite us to think in centuries, to accept that landscapes are not fixed, but alive. The distant horizon, if you could leap forward in time 1,000,000 years, you might not recognize this coastline. The chalk might be worn back so far that entire valleys have opened to the sea. New headlands might form where harder rock resists the waves. The white glow might be scattered in fragments along the shore instead of in one towering wall. And yet, standing on that far future shore, you would still be looking at the same story. Water meeting land, land giving way. The endless shaping of the edge. The present moment. For now, the cliffs still rise in their familiar shape. Gulls wheel above them. Ferries pass beneath them. People walk their edges and take photographs as if the moment could last forever. And in a way, it does. Not in the sense of permanence, but in the sense that each stage of the cliff's life is as complete as the one before it. This moment here is part of the cliff's story, just as the cliffs are part of yours. There is a quiet truth written into every shoreline. The sea will take back what the land has borrowed. It is not theft, not malice, just the steady balance of nature. It's an exchange that has been happening for as long as there have been coasts. To stand at the edge of England's chalk cliffs is to witness this truth in slow motion. You can hear it in the wind that funnels along the face. See it in the flecks of white chalk scattered at the base. Feel it in the ground that, though solid, beneath your feet carries the faint tremor of change. To learn to let the land go is not an easy lesson. Humans build homes, memories, and meaning on landscapes. We like to believe they will stay as they are, that the paths our grandparents walked will still be there for our grandchildren. But the sea does not keep our maps. It has its own. The first step, accepting the impermanent Saxons, does not come naturally. When a section of cliff collapses, the first reaction is often grief for the loss of a familiar view, for the path that is now gone, for the garden that will never be walked again. But the cliffs themselves have never been permanent. Even in the years when they seemed unchanging, waves were loosening chalk from their base. Frost was working its way into hairline cracks. Rain was carrying tiny grains into the sea. Learning to let the land go begins with this perspective, understanding that what is happening now is part of a cycle far older than us. The emotional weight of place people often talk about losing, a place as though it were a piece of furniture misplaced. But losing a place is something deeper. It is the unraveling of an anchor in memory. A childhood spent walking a certain cliff-top path imprints a map in the mind. When that path falls into the sea, it feels as though part of the self has fallen with it. This is why acceptance is not simply about facts and science. It is about honoring the meaning a place held for those who knew it. To let go is not to forget. It is to carry the memory forward into a new shape of the coast. The illusion of control. Humans are skilled at shaping landscapes. We build harbors, dredge rivers, reclaim land from the sea. For a while, it can feel like we have mastered the coast. But here, at the chalk cliffs, that illusion eventually breaks. Seawalls can be built. Rocks can be piled at the base. Drainage systems can be dug into the clifftop soil. Yet, the erosion continues. Sometimes, our attempts to control it only shift the problem farther down the shore, speeding up erosion in the next unprotected stretch. To learn to let the land go is to understand the limits of intervention. It is to see that the coastline is not a line we draw, but a conversation between earth and ocean that will outlast our plans. Nature's way of renewal, what is taken by the sea, is not simply gone. It becomes part of something else. The chalk that breaks away crumbles into fine sediment, feeding marine ecosystems. Small caves carved into the base of the cliff become nesting sites for seabirds. Tide pools appear where solid rock once stood. Letting go of the land does not mean mourning it as lost entirely. It means seeing what it becomes, how the edge of one life becomes the beginning of another. Stories of past retreats. You look at old maps, you will see fields, paths, and even whole villages that once stood where the sea now swirls. Centuries ago, some communities moved their churches inland, stone by stone, as the cliff drew closer. Others let the sea take their buildings, trusting that the living could relocate, even if the structures could not. These stories are often told as tragedies. And yes, there was hardship, but there was also resilience. The people adapted, finding new ways to live with the moving edge. They understood something we are still relearning. The coastline is not ours to fix in place. It is ours to live alongside. The pain of the present moment, even with all this history. The collapse of a beloved stretch of cliff can feel like a fresh wound. A bench where someone proposed may now overlook empty air. A path where friends once walked may end abruptly in a jagged drop. When it is personal, erosion is not an abstract concept. It is an intimate loss. Allowing space for that grief is part of learning to let go. We do not have to pretend we are untouched. We can feel the ache of absence while still respecting the inevitability of change. Shaping the future without fighting the tide there is a way to work with erosion rather than against it. Communities can plan buildings farther from the cliff edge, design trails that can be rerouted, and create viewing points that can be moved as the land retreats. Education can help too. Visitors who understand the nature of chalk cliffs are more likely to keep a safe distance from unstable edges, to respect closures when paths are no longer secure. In this way, we can still enjoy the cliffs without trying to freeze them in time. A different kind of preservation does not always mean stopping change. Sometimes it means documenting the present so that future generations can know what once was. Photographs, paintings, written descriptions, these become a record of the coastline's shifting form. Local museums and archives can hold these stories, so that when a section falls, it lives on in more than memory. this is a form of letting go that still keeps a connection. The role of witness to watch a coastline change is to witness deep time in motion. Each collapse is both an ending and a beginning. Standing at the edge, you may feel small, but you are part of the same story as the cliff, the tide, and the wind. Letting go of the land does not mean stepping away. It means watching with open eyes, knowing you are seeing something few people in history have noticed so closely. The gift of perspective. When we let go, we gain something unexpected: perspective. The cliffs remind us that even the grandest, most solid things we know are temporary in their current form. They remind us that we, too, will change, and that our own edges will shift with time. Learning to let the land go is also learning to let ourselves be shaped by life. To accept that movement and change are not the enemies of beauty, but its companions. The quiet agreement, perhaps letting go, is less about loss and more about honoring an agreement we never signed, but have always been part of. The land shelters us, feeds us, gives us beauty. In return, we allow it to live according to its own rhythms. When the sea asks for part of it back, we do not resist with anger. We watch it go, and we remember it, and we keep walking the paths that remain, knowing they, too, are temporary. Standing on the edge, today to day, the cliffs still rise, the paths still wind along the top. The sea still breaks into white foam. At their base, you can stand there and feel the wind, hear the gulls, taste the salt in the air. You can take in the view and know that, for now, this is yours to see. Tomorrow, it may be different. Next year, a section may be gone, right? But that does not make today's view any less real. In fact, it makes it more precious. Not everything must be surrendered to the sea. Even in a world of constant change, there are ways to protect pieces of what we love, not to freeze them in place forever, but to give them more time, more seasons, more mornings in the light. Preservation, when done with humility, is not a battle against nature. It is a conversation with it. We cannot hold back the tide, but we can slow the pace of its reach, and in doing so, give generations yet to come the chance to stand where we now stand, knowing what to save and what to let go. The first task is to know the difference. Some things are worth the effort. A historic lighthouse guiding ships through a dangerous channel, a coastal footpath that links communities, a fresh water source feeding both people and wildlife. Other things, however precious they feel, cannot be saved without great harm to something else. A section of cliff too unstable may be safer to surrender. A building too close to the edge may risk more lives if clung to. Preservation begins with choosing wisely. It is an act of discernment, a willingness to say yes where protection is possible, goodbye where it is not. The tools we have across the coast. People have tried many methods to slow erosion. Seawalls that absorb the impact of waves, their dark surfaces standing like silent guards at the cliff's feet. Rock armoring, where heavy boulders are piled along the shore, breaking the force of incoming tides before they strike the chalk. Groins, wooden or stone barriers stretching into the water, designed to trap sand and shingle, rebuilding the natural beach buffer that erosion has stolen. Drainage systems atop the cliffs, channeling rainwater away so it cannot seep down, and loosen the chalk from within. Vegetation planting, binding the soil with roots, slowing the wind from carrying it grain by grain into the sea. None of these tools stop time, but together they can turn a single decade of survival into several. The role of relocations, sometimes preservation, is not about holding the ground in place, but about moving what stands on it. A path can be rerouted inland, following a new curve that stays clear of danger. A bench can be lifted and set down farther from the edge, so it can still face the horizon without fear. Even a building, if its structure allows, can be taken apart stone by stone and rebuilt elsewhere. Each relocation is a quiet victory, a way to keep the story of a place alive without trying to defy the forces shaping it. Guarding the story's preservation is not always physical. Okay. When the land itself cannot be saved, its history can be. Local archives can keep photographs, maps from before the retreat, recordings of residents remembering what once stood there. Artists can paint the cliffs as they are now, knowing that in years to come, their work will be the only view left. By preserving the stories, we protect not just the coastline, but the meaning it carried for the people who lived beside it. The value of community involvement, no preservation. Effort lasts without the hands and hearts of a community. It is the people who live near the cliffs, who notice the first small cracks in the path, who can warn others before a collapse, who can gather to reinforce barriers after a storm. When locals are part of the work, it becomes more than a project, it becomes stewardship. And stewardship has a way of passing down, generation to generation, balancing nature and necessity. There are moments when protecting one thing means letting go of another. A seawall might save a village, but disrupt the natural flow of sand, causing erosion elsewhere. Reinforcing a cliff might protect a historic site, but harm nesting habitats for birds. True preservation requires a wide view, one that weighs the benefit to humans against the health of the larger ecosystem. It is a balance we often get wrong at first, but with patience, we can learn to listen to the coastline as much as we look at it. The example of Rottingdean along the Sussex coast. The village of Rottingdean once lost large sections of cliff to erosion, but the community worked together, building a combination of seawalls, groins, and pathways set back from the most fragile edges. The cliffs still retreat. They always will, but the pace has slowed enough that the paths and gardens above remain safe for now. Rottingdean is not a fortress. It is a conversation between land, sea, and people, and a reminder that preservation is possible when done with respect. Time as a preservation tool. Sometimes the goal is not to keep something forever, but simply to give it more time. 10 extra years can mean a child growing up with the same view their parents knew. 20 extra years can mean an elderly resident keeping the same walk to the shore that they have taken for decades. Preservation buys moments, birthdays, sunsets, ordinary mornings. It buys continuity in a world where change is constant. The beauty of living edges there is a tendency to see preserved land as frozen, untouched. But in reality, the healthiest preserved spaces are still alive, still changing, just at a pace we can live alongside. A reinforced cliff face may still grow wildflowers in spring. A relocated path may still collect puddles after rain. These are not lifeless monuments. Think of living edges where care and change coexist. Education as a preservation act. When people understand what is happening, they tread more carefully. Visitors who know that chalk cliffs are porous and fragile will keep a safe distance from unstable overhangs. Residents who understand how rainfall weakens the cliff may support new drainage projects rather than resisting them. Education turns every passerby into a quiet guardian, someone who notices, respects, and values the coastline's fragility. Technology. In the coastline's future, new tools are giving preservationists more insight than ever before. Drones can scan the cliffs in fine detail, revealing hairline fractures invisible from the ground. Sensors embedded in the soil can track moisture levels, predicting when heavy rain might trigger a collapse. Satellite imagery can watch the entire coastline over years, mapping its retreat like a moving signature. With this knowledge, we can act earlier, fortifying vulnerable sections before they become emergencies, preserving more than just land. When we protect a cliff, we also protect everything connected to it, the homes that stand above it, the wildlife that nests within it, the beaches that form at its base, the culture that has grown along its edge. preservation is rarely just about rock and soil. It is about the web of life and memory woven around it. A season-by-season effort, preservation is not a single act. It is a rhythm. In winter, storms batter the coast. Teams check barriers, clear blocked drains, and watch for sudden collapses. In spring, planting begins. Wild grasses, coastal shrubs, anything with roots to bind the soil. In summer, visitor numbers grow, and education becomes the main shield. Signs, guided walks, remind us to stay clear of dangerous edges. In autumn, maintenance work is done before the next round of winter storms. It is a cycle, much like the tides, endless, patient, necessary, letting preservation evolve. What works today may not work tomorrow. Climate change is giving storms sharper teeth, raising sea levels, and changing the balance of sand and shingle along the shore. Preservation cannot be rigid, It must adapt new methods, new tools, and sometimes new priorities. In this way, preservation becomes less about holding a single shape and more about guiding the coastline through its changes with care and foresight. The quiet satisfaction of care. There is a certain peace in preservation work. It is slow, deliberate, filled with small victories rather than grand triumphs. A repaired drainage channel that holds through a storm. A footpath that remains safe for another summer. Section of cliff that, for now, is still exactly where it was last year. These moments do not make headlines, but they are the heart of the work. Looking beyond ourselves, perhaps the truest measure of preservation is whether the coastline will be there for people who have not yet been born. We will not meet them, but they will walk paths we protect. Look out over edges we reinforced, and perhaps thank us without knowing our names. That is the quiet reward, to leave behind not just a story of loss, but a legacy of care. There is a stillness that comes when you stand where the land ends. It is not the kind of stillness you find in a quiet room, but one born of contrasts, the roar of waves below, the whistle of wind past your ears, the weight of the ground under your feet, and the knowledge that this place is not forever. You are both part of it and apart from it, a visitor at the edge of something ancient, something in motion. The present is a vanishing point. The now you stand in is not fixed. The cliff beneath you was not always here, and it will not always be here again. Every grain of chalk was once the shell of a tiny sea creature, settling on the floor of a warm, shallow ocean millions of years ago. Layer by layer, their remains pressed into stone, lifted slowly toward the sky, and carved by rain, frost, and tied into the white faces we know today. You are standing on the compressed memory of another age, and the wind is already turning this memory back into dust. The subtle movements of change even when the cliffs seem solid. They are shifting. Rainwater seeps in, carrying salt, loosening particles one by one. The sea below reaches, never in a hurry, but never stopping, like a hand that knows it will eventually close around what it seeks. From the place where you stand, you might not see the collapse coming, but in the long view, the view of centuries, it is already in motion. Time measured in steps backwards, the edge moves inland by centimeters, then by meters. Paths that were safe in your childhood are now cut short by air. An old photograph might show a fence post still in place, now lying broken in the surf. A map from a century ago draws the coast where only water lies today. The retreat is slow enough to live alongside, yet fast enough to notice if you pay attention. The witness and the participant when you stand here. You are not just a witness. You are part of the cliff's story. Your weight presses into the ground. Your shadow joins the gulls above the surf. Your breath mingles with the air that has traveled across the channel. Every person who has stood at this edge has added something. Invisible, a thought, a question, a private moment of awe or fear. In this way, the cliffs hold more than stone. They hold memory Why we are drawn to edges are where certainty thins. A field is solid. You know where you can walk, where you can rest. A cliff edge is an invitation to look beyond, to measure the drop, okay? To listen to the sound of waves working endlessly against the base, to feel how small your body is against the horizon. Perhaps you're drawn to them because they remind us that permanence is an illusion, or perhaps because they are beautiful, precisely because they are fleeting, the illusion of. Now, as a safe harbor, we often treat the present as though it is a place we can anchor in, unchanging, dependable. But here, standing on this shifting white edge, you can feel how thin the present really is. It is only a moment between what has already fallen and what will fall next. To stand here is to accept that you cannot hold this moment still. You can only notice it before it moves on. Light on chalk. There is a certain kind of light that the cliffs seem to collect and scatter, a brightness that is almost too pure to be held in the eyes. In the early morning, it is pale gold, washing the white with warmth. At midday, it is almost silver, sharp enough to make you squint. By evening, the cliffs take on the color of the sea itself, as though they are preparing to slip quietly into it. This changing light is part of the edge's truth that nothing remains exactly as it was, not even for the space of a day. The sound of the present moment, listen closely, and you will hear not just the crash of waves, but the smaller, quieter sounds, the click of pebbles tumbling together with each retreat of the tide, the drip of water from a crack where rain still drains days later, the whisper of wind against coarse grasses that cling to the cliff top. Each sound is fleeting, yet together they make the voice of the now you stand in. By tomorrow, the tide will rearrange the pebbles, the wind will change direction, the voice will shift. Footprints on the brinks. Sometimes you find traces of others who came before you, a set of footprints along a path that ends abruptly. A lost scarf caught in a thorn bush, a bench inscription that reads like a fragment of someone's story. These small remains are like echoes. They tell you that the now is always shared, even when you stand alone. What the cliffs teach without words stand. Here long enough, and the cliffs will teach you without speaking. They will teach you that strength does not mean stillness, that you can stand tall and still be in motion. They will teach you that beauty does not require permanence, that something can be worth loving, even as it changes beyond recognition. And they will teach you that endings are not always abrupt, that some endings take centuries, folding in the quiet persistence of water against stone. The responsibility of the present being here, knowing the edge is retreating, places a small responsibility on you. You may not stop to see, but you can walk carefully. You can keep to the paths that protect both yourself and the land. You can notice changes and share them so that the next person is not caught unaware. Your presence can be careless or careful, either way. It will leave its mark. When the edge is no longer here, one day the place you are standing will not exist. The path will end farther inland. The edge will have shifted, and the sea will wash where grass once grew. Someone else will stand at that new edge, feeling what you feel now, knowing that they too are looking at a vanishing present. This thought is not sad, only honest. It is the nature of all edges, carrying the edge within you when you leave. The cliff will remain in your mind, the light on the white stone, the weight of air between you and the drop, the endless movement of the sea below. In this way, you carry the now with you, even as the cliff itself changes. Perhaps that is the real preservation, to keep not just the image, but the feeling of having stood there, fully aware of where you were in time. The edge as a mirror standing here is not only about the land, it is about you. You too are made of layers of past lives. You too are shaped by forces you cannot control. And you, too, are moving toward a future where parts of you will fall away to reveal something new. The cliff's truth is your truth. Change is not a choice. It is the condition of being alive. Leaving the edge eventually, you will turn away back toward the inland path, back to the world of steady ground and shelter, but the edge will remain with you as a quiet reminder that every moment is temporary, and every temporary thing is worth noticing. You may find yourself seeking other edges in life, not always physical ones, but moments where you stand between what is known and what is coming. And when you do, you will remember what it felt like to stand here at the edge of now.